Trump's visit is just the latest example of the president escalating his fight with Democrats over everything, but he thinks that this fight over the crackdown on crime is a winning one. Trump's decision to visit the Guard wasn't meant for the folks living in the district. It was meant for you in the middle of America. 80% of the people living in D.C. despise the takeover, despite the fact that crime is down substantially. It goes to show you how real the hatred for President Trump is in D.C. There's a number of people in D.C. who would prefer more crime to Donald Trump getting a win. The president is portraying a strong on crime persona to the rest of the nation. And the message is a dare, if you will, to Democratic mayors and governors who let crime run rampant. Number one, he's going to call them out. But number two, basically, he's saying that if you don't clean up your cities, I, President Trump, will do it for you. That's our Why It Matters segment tonight. By deploying the National Guard, Trump set out to clean up the district, but he also picked a fight with Democrats. Rather than fight crime, they decided to fight him, and that is exactly what Donald Trump wanted. It goes to show Democrats are solely concerned with fighting the president, no matter the circumstances. Trump will point that out at every turn, and history tells us Trump wins that battle every single time. And Democrats will take the bait every single time. So in this case, Trump will argue Democrats no longer care about keeping people safe. And to be fair, they used to.
Making the streets safe is not a Democratic or Republican issue. They must be taken off the street.
There must be no doubt about whose side we're on. People who commit crimes should be caught, convicted, and punished.
We need to take these people on. They are often connected to big drug cartels. They are not just gangs of kids anymore. They are often the kinds of kids that are called super predators. No conscience, no empathy.
If we're going to go after folks who are here illegally, we should do it smartly and go after folks who are criminals, gangbangers, people who are hurting the community.
So consider the contrast. I am not one to give political advice, but Democrats could be spending this time talking to average Americans about how they are going to improve the economy. Our segments about high prices, which are a real thing and continue to be a real thing in America, those segments are consistently the highest rated. People care. Democrats could be talking about how to improve people's lives. Instead, they choose to bemoan how bad Donald Trump is. It's not working. In a moment, we'll break down Trump's plan to expand National Guard deployments to other cities nationwide. We'll also hear from lawmakers on both sides of the aisle. We begin tonight with NewsNation's Kelly Meyer, live at the White House where Trump just returned. Good evening, Kelly.
Hey there, Leland. So the president here at the White House and just wrote on Truth Social just in the past few minutes. He wrote, quote, "Make Washington, D.C. great again," along with a picture of him speaking to National Guardsmen and local police. And the president says he's solved D.C.'s crime problem in just 4 days. So since the operation started, the White House tells us there have been 630 total arrests and law enforcement has taken 86 firearms off the streets. During his visit today, the president thanked the Guard while also giving us new details about his planned, what he calls, beautification of D.C. He says he wants to make the district look like one of his golf clubs. Take a listen.
You do the job on safety, and I'll get this place fixed up physically, and we're going to be so proud of it at the end of 6 months, but let's say at the end of a year, this place will be maxed out in terms of beauty.
So President Trump says he wants to redo the medians, redo the pavement, take down the graffiti, fix the signs, and redo the parks with sprinklers. He says he'll go back to Congress for more cash. And on top of his day job, the president is really taking on this role of city planner-in-chief so far in his second term. Leland.
All right, Kelly Meyer at the White House. Thank you. Bring in Tom Dupree, former Deputy Assistant Attorney General under George W. Bush, Congressman Gabe Evans, Republican from Colorado. Gents, good to see both of you. Counselor, start with you first. Trump just said, and we heard it in the soundbite when he was out at visiting the Guard, we're going to stay here for a while. How long can he stay?
Well, In one sense, Leland, he can stay for 30 days from the time he went in. There are certain laws that give the president the power to control local law enforcement in D.C. that expires at the end of 30 days. It can be extended, of course, but at least there's going to be a 30-day benchmark. But there are also powers that he can exercise beyond 30 days. So I think it would be a mistake to think that once that 30-day period passes, the president's authority completely evaporates. I suspect, though, that at the 30-day mark, everyone, people in the administration, others will take a look at how things have been progressing. So far, as you reported, the early returns seem to be good and that there does seem to be a decrease in crime. It's possible that there'll be some momentum to try to extend that 30-day period, depending on how things are going.
Congressman Evans, we made the point that this is really not about talking to the people of Washington, D.C. It's one of the most liberal cities in the country. I think it voted well north of 80% for Donald Trump. I'm wondering what you're hearing in Colorado. I think about Denver, a city I used to live in, love dearly, that also has had its own problems with progressive Democratic prosecutors and mayors who have allowed crime to get out of hand. Are there any constituents coming up to you saying, hey, will Trump do in Denver what he did in D.C.?
Well, you can see my background right behind me. I spent 10 years as a cop in the Denver metro area. I was in the Colorado Army National Guard for almost 12 years. And public safety is something that is critically important to my constituents and to folks around the country. And we're seeing in Washington, D.C. right now that core message of Republicans being reinforced. Republicans are about public safety, keeping our communities safe, getting the murder rate down, getting the carjacking rate down, getting the auto theft rate down, and making sure that we have safe places to live, to work, and to raise families. That's something that the president is doubling down on. That's a message by which I actually flipped a seat against a Democrat incumbent here in Colorado because folks want to feel safe in their own neighborhoods. That's what the president's doing, and that's a core part of the Republican message.
I'm sure that's an answer to the question about what's happening in D.C. I was a little bit more focused on Denver and how people out there are looking at it from outside looking in. Tom, what does this mean for other cities? The implicit argument is there from Trump to say my hometown of St. Louis, Missouri, where the murder rate is double that of D.C. But does he have the option to do this in other American cities?
Leland, he does, although with one caveat that I'll get to in a moment. But you're absolutely right that I think what we are seeing in D.C. is almost a test program that, if successful, I would imagine President Trump is going to try to roll out in other cities across America. Certainly, Washington, D.C. is not the only big city in America with a serious crime problem. The one caveat I would give is that the District of Columbia is governed by a special system of laws that do give the president authority to do what he's doing, to come in, to basically federalize local law enforcement and essentially take over the functions of the D.C. Police Department when the regular police department can't handle it. He doesn't have the same legal authority if you're talking about other cities in the United States. Washington, D.C. is unique. It's special. I think he's going to be slightly more restricted in what he can do in other states, but I don't think that's going to limit this administration from trying to duplicate what they're doing in D.C. and other states if this proves successful.
Congressman Evans, there's an argument to be made here that this is another example of even a Republican Congress and a Republican Senate giving away their powers to an increasingly powerful executive. Why would Republicans in Congress, if you feel so strongly about crime in D.C., which I do as well, it's a huge problem, why didn't you all take the lead on this? Why not put legislation through Congress and up for debate about allowing a long-term federal presence in D.C.?
I think Congress absolutely has put forth legislation and actually had legislation signed into law to make not just the District of Columbia, but all of the United States safer again. Look no further than what we did in the big, beautiful bill where we allocated $750 million to FLETC. So that's the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center, basically police academy for federal agents, because we know we need more bandwidth, we know we need more law enforcement, and we know we need to be able to recruit and retain the federal law enforcement that we have to be able to go out and do things like clean up Washington, D.C., to do things like clean up Denver, Colorado. You asked, what's the feeling on the ground in Denver, Colorado? I'll tell you, earlier this week, we had very public federal indictments announced against 30 Tren de Aragua, so that's a Venezuelan prison gang. We had public indictments announced against these individuals as a result of a lot of the work that the federal agencies, the DEA and the FBI have done.
Yeah, it's a little different than what
safe.
Trump is doing. Congressman, thank you very much. Tom Dupree, appreciate it. Good to see both of you.
Thank you for watching. Subscribe below and download our NewsNation app right now on your phone, and you will get fact-based, unbiased news for all Americans.